Rain slicked the cobblestones of Grenton Hollow long before the sun dared rise. The air was heavy and wet, carrying the odor of damp wood, old iron, and something fouler that clung to the gallows square like a ghost no priest could banish. Elias Morren, the town's hangman for 18 years, stood beneath the oaken beam he knew better than any man had right to. His hands were rough, calloused from years of rope, and yet that morning, as he threaded the new noose, they trembled. He told himself it was the cold. The crowd began to gather as the hour neared. Farmers in mud-caked boots, fishwives wrapped in shawls. A few boys clambered up crates for a better view, jostling and laughing before the hush fell. It always came, like a tide pulled back by some unseen force. The silence before a death was different from any other. It had weight. Sheriff Wexley appeared first, heavy and red-faced, escorting the prisoner. The guards flanked her like bookends to a cursed volume. She walked with grace, shoulders back, each step deliberate. And when her face lifted to the crowd, a ripple passed through Elias, a sensation like every hair on his body rising in revolt. Eliza Dorne. She was supposed to be dead. No, not just dead. Executed. By him. 10 years ago. He remembered it with a clarity that mocked the fog of memory. The cool dampness of that morning. The way she had not wept. How she had smiled as he tightened the noose. How her feet never kicked, only dangled, serene, like a puppet at rest. He had watched her die. He had buried her himself, as the town's priest refused to read rites over a murderer. A pine box. Simple. Unmarked. He remembered the sound the lid made when he nailed it shut. A hollow sound. Final. But here she was. Unchanged. Not older. Not paler. Not altered by time or rot or death. Her black hair was still parted perfectly down the middle, her gray eyes unwavering, skin smooth as the day he'd touched her wrist to check for a final pulse. The sheriff motioned him to take his place. Elias stepped forward, each motion mechanical. He glanced once to the sky, wondering if God watched this sort of thing, wondering if he ever did. The rope hung, waiting. His lever, stood to his right, the wooden handle worn smooth by his own hand. Eliza Dorne stood on the platform. She looked at him and smiled, the kind of smile that said she remembered too. Proceed, Wexley ordered, fidgeting with his hat. Elias stared. His legs wouldn't move. His arm wouldn't raise. His throat burned with words he didn't understand. I can't, he whispered. Wexley stepped closer. What? I said I won't. That woman. I buried her. 10 years ago. A murmur rippled through the crowd. It started small, a nervous chuckle from someone who thought it a jest. But it grew, like fire catching in dry brush. Wexley's face went purple. Have you lost your mind, Morren? Do your job. I won't. I hanged her already. She's supposed to be dead. This is wrong. Eliza's smile never faded. A deputy stepped forward to grab Elias by the arm. He pulled away and stepped back, nearly stumbling off the platform. She's already been hanged, Elias shouted now, voice trembling. Ask the old priest. Ask anyone with sense. That woman is dead. I saw the life leave her. The crowd had become a living thing, restless, murmuring, uncertain whether to laugh or flee. Wexley waved down another deputy. Take him in. We'll find someone else to finish it. Elias struggled but didn't resist. As they dragged him away, he turned to look at Eliza one last time. She mouthed something to him. 3 words. You remember right. The cell was cold, its stones sweat-slick and moss-touched, though Elias hardly noticed. He sat on the cot like a sack of meat dumped by a butcher, hands limp between his knees, breath shallow. Wexley hadn't pressed charges. Not yet. Maybe he thought the hangman had gone senile. Or mad. Maybe he feared Elias's claim held some awful weight. Either way, the bars were more for precaution than punishment, for now. Elias hadn't spoken since being tossed inside. Until darkness fell. Until he was sure he was alone. Then he whispered into the stone, she was dead. I know it. Hours later, when the jailer's snores confirmed his absence, Elias worked the old trick he'd learned from the highwayman. Pushing the cot just so, dislodging the stone beneath. The tunnel was tight, filthy, and wet, but it was there. He'd used it once before to avoid prying eyes after a public lashing gone wrong. He emerged behind the stables, dirt-caked and wheezing. The moon hid behind clouds. The wind was warm and sour, like breath exhaled from a sick bed. The churchyard wasn't far. He reached the rusted gate, now half swallowed by ivy. The old church itself stood skeletal, long abandoned after Father Morren declared it unfit for sermons and safe only for the damned. But the graves remained. So did the yew tree. It loomed ahead of him, twisted like a gnarled hand scraping at the heavens. Beneath it, the ground sagged slightly. The same place. Always the same. He'd buried her there. Elias dropped to his knees and began to dig. No shovel. Only his hands, worn and bleeding by the first few inches. Soil clung to his nails. Stones scraped his palms. But he didn't stop. The hours passed. And then wood. The pine box. He laughed once, sharp and bitter. See? You were dead. He pulled more earth away, bearing the lid. Then paused. Because it was not sealed. Not nailed. Not shut. The lid sat slightly askew. A sliver of black inside. His breath caught. He pushed the lid aside. It was empty. No bones. No rot. No Eliza. Just a single black ribbon curled in the shape of a noose. He stumbled back, fell on his side. Mud soaked into his shirt. The yew tree above him groaned in the wind. He looked again. Still empty. The grave he'd dug. The grave he'd filled. The grave he'd sealed with his own hands. Gone. Something moved in the tree above. A soft creaking. Not wind. Wait. He looked up. Nothing there. But he could feel it. That smile. Watching. The church bell tolled once. Then again. The second chime thinner than the first, as if the metal of the bell itself had tired of the sound. Elias Morren stood outside the stone-faced courthouse, his fingers raw and bruised from a night of digging, the black ribbon he'd found tucked into the inside of his coat. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just brief blinks of darkness, punctuated by images of the empty box, and the impossible stillness of the woman who now sat in a cell no more than 2 floors above him. The clerk behind the desk squinted at Elias as he entered. A young man, thin, spectacled, sleeves too long. He looked more suited to folding maps than managing criminal archives. I need the court records, Elias said, voice low. From the hanging of Eliza Dorne. 10 years ago, 1876, I performed the execution myself. The clerk raised an eyebrow, his hand hovering over the logbook. We don't. I mean, I've only been here 3 years, sir. But we don't have anyone by that name on the list of capital cases. Elias frowned. You must. She was tried here. Judge Everham presided. I remember it because she wouldn't speak a word, not even to the priest. Smiled the whole time. The clerk scratched at his chin, uncertain. Judge Everham passed in 79. Stroke. I suppose I could check the archive dockets, but... He trailed off, seeing the look in Elias's eyes, an urgency just shy of panic. The hangman's knuckles were white around the edge of the counter. The clerk gestured toward the rear door. You'll want the basement archive, he said. Far room. Iron cabinet labeled executions. There's a lantern. No windows down there. Elias didn't thank him. He just walked, boots echoing sharply against the stone floor, pushing open the heavy door to the courthouse basement. The air hit him immediately, damp, with a scent of old ink and mildew. The walls bled condensation. Rows of shelves filled the narrow room like ribs in a crypt. In the back, as promised, stood the iron cabinet. He opened it slowly. Inside were folders, bound ledgers, names he recognized, some he'd sent to the gallows himself. But no Eliza Dorne. Not under D. Not under E. He checked the 1876 ledger. The month of June, when the hanging took place, was blank. The paper was there, the binding intact. But the pages for that month had been torn clean from the book. Elias stood still. He could hear something. Not sound exactly, but a presence. As if someone was standing just behind the rows of shelves. Watching. Listening. He didn't turn around. He forced himself to breathe through his nose. He placed the ledger back. Then he looked again at the cabinet. Something about the back wall. The wood behind the ledgers. Cleaner, less dust. He pushed one of the thick ledgers aside and found a small envelope wedged into the crack. No name. Just a wax seal on the back, broken already. Inside were 2 items. The first, a photograph. Black and white, faded at the corners. A crowd in front of the old gallows. Most had their backs to the camera, but near the front was a woman. Face toward the lens, expression calm, almost serene. It was Eliza. No mistake. The second, a page torn from what looked like a priest's journal. She asked me not to pray for her. Not because she rejected God, but because she said prayer makes the door open wider. She called it the black interval, the space between the breath and the rope. She said that's when it slips in. I told the executioner she was dangerous, not because of what she did, but because of what she knew. He laughed, and then she smiled at me as they placed the hood over her head. That smile. I see it even now, in my dreams, in the still water of the wash basin. Father Morren, 1876. Elias folded the note back into the envelope. His hands shook, not from fear exactly, but from an understanding that had begun to take shape in the hollow space behind his ribs. Something about this woman, Eliza Dorne, had gone unnoticed by the courts, the law, even the church. But not him. He left the basement in silence. The town was quieter than usual. Even the market had thinned. No children laughed near the bakery. The cats had vanished, and the butcher's dogs no longer barked from behind their gates. Elias walked to the one man he thought might remember. Not the judge, long buried, but the priest. Father Morren had not given a sermon in over 8 years. He lived behind the chapel now, in the little lean-to shack with a broken cross nailed over the door. His hair had turned from red to gray to white, his back bent like the spine of a burned book. He answered the door without surprise. "I was expecting you," he said. "You've seen her again." Elias nodded. "I buried her. With my own hands. 10 years ago. And now she's in that jail cell. Her face is the same." The priest stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Inside, the air was heavy with candle wax and chalk dust. On the far wall was a crude mural, a painted door surrounded by eyes. Not eyes in a face. Just the eyes. Disembodied. Floating in circles. "I don't perform the sacraments anymore," Morren said. "Not after her." "What is she?" Elias asked. The old man sank into a chair, pulling a blanket across his legs. "She's not the first, you know. Or the last. I saw her once before she was called Eliza. She was brought before the court in 1846. Another town. Another body. Same eyes. Same face. Same crime. Murder without remorse. No witnesses. No motive. Just a vacancy, left behind when she moved on." Elias said nothing. He was staring at the mural. "They're always the same," Morren continued. "They speak little. They look calm. But they are hosts. And they don't age. They only wait." "For what?" "For the door to open again." The priest pointed to the mural. "It's a kind of tether, I think, between here and where they come from. A doorway that exists only at the moment of death. Not true death, but ritual death. Hanging. It's the pause, the breath before the neck snaps. That's where it begins." Elias reached into his coat and pulled out the black ribbon. The priest recoiled. "Where did you get that?" "In the coffin. She left it for you," Morren whispered. "She always does. A token for the one who recognizes her. She remembers. Every time. And so she marks you. As her witness." Elias rose to his feet. "I won't let her do it again." The priest shook his head. "You can't stop it. The records are gone. The law forgets. The church forgets. But she remembers. And she's always smiling." That night, Elias dreamed of the hanging again. But this time, it wasn't Eliza who stood at the gallows. It was him. His hands were tied. The rope coiled around his neck, warm and wet. The crowd below was silent. No jeering. No weeping. Just watching. And at the front, beneath the platform, Eliza stood in a black dress, holding a small book. She opened it. Inside were pages made of skin. His name was written on every one. The next day, Elias went to the jail. He demanded to speak to the woman. The warden, a rotund, ruddy-faced man who had once joked that Elias had the steadiest lever hand in the county, refused at first. "She's under gag order, awaiting transfer to the capital for final sentencing." "She's already been sentenced," Elias said. "Once. And that didn't take." The warden stared at him. "I don't know what you're getting at. But I don't want any talk of superstitious nonsense. This town is already on edge. Half the shops closed yesterday. The doctor's wife says her baby's eyes changed color overnight. And that woman, Eliza, just sits there in the dark. Doesn't eat. Doesn't sleep. Smiles when you walk past. Let me speak to her." The warden finally relented. "She won't answer. But fine. You get 5 minutes." The door opened with a clatter. Down the hall, behind iron bars, sat Eliza Dorne. No restraints. No chains. Just her hands folded in her lap, head tilted like a doll on a crooked shelf. Elias approached. He could smell something. like rainwater soaked in ash. You remember me, he said. She said nothing. You remember the rope, the pine box, the dirt on your dress. Still nothing. Then, after a pause, you found the ribbon. Her voice was soft, calm, not mocking, not angry. Yes, Elias said. Why? To see if you'd follow. Most don't. He swallowed. Follow what? The trail, she said. Backwards. Through the hollows. Through the years. Through the doors we leave open when we think no one's watching. Elias leaned forward. What are you? She looked at him, eyes shining with something that was not light. I am whatever people let me be, she said. A victim. A killer. A girl in a white dress. A shadow in a locked room. I don't change. The world just forgets. Every time I'm hanged, a little more slips through. He gritted his teeth. I won't let it happen again. She smiled. You already did. Later that night, the warden would be found hanged in his office. No sign of struggle. No note. Only a ribbon tied around the base of the lever that had executed 20 men. Black silk. Untouched by dust. The jail was closed the following morning. Prisoners transferred. Eliza's cell empty. No one saw her leave. But Elias would find a fresh grave in the churchyard 3 nights later. A pine box. No name. No records. Just a single word carved into the wood with what looked like a fingernail. Witness. There was a rule Elias had kept to all his life. Even before he became a hangman, the dead don't return. Not in flesh. Not in face. Not like this. But Eliza Dorne was back, standing on the gallows. The very same gallows he had used to hang her 10 years ago. Her skin unchanged. Her smile just as pale and soft as it was when she dropped. And only he knew why it was impossible. Since the day he refused to pull the lever, the days had begun slipping sideways. Small things first. The town clock at the square ticked backwards for 5 seconds at a time. His boots wore through overnight despite being barely a year old. His father's old shaving mirror reflected an unfamiliar angle of his face. A smirk he wasn't making. But now things were getting worse. And the smile was everywhere. The first dream came 3 nights after the grave was found empty. Elias was no stranger to bad dreams, but this one didn't fade when he woke. He dreamt of a field of gallows, row upon row, stretching out into a red horizon. 1,000 ropes, 1,000 levers. And beneath each noose, a woman in black. All the same face, all smiling. Every one of them was Eliza. They whispered in unison, "You let me live." He woke gasping, drenched in sweat, the pillow clutched in both hands as though strangling it. But what chilled him more was the sound coming from the far end of the room. A creaking board, then another, and then a faint, deliberate giggle. He did not sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, he went back to the sheriff's office. "I know what I saw," Elias insisted. "I buried that woman. I built the coffin with my own hands. And now she's back. You saw her." Sheriff Wexley leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "I saw a woman get hanged 2 weeks ago. She's dead now. That's the end of it." "No," Elias said. "That's the beginning of it." Wexley squinted. "You getting religious now, Elias?" "No," Elias whispered. "I'm getting terrified." But there was no help to be found. The sheriff had already spoken to the mayor and the priest, Father Morren, now withdrawn, barely emerging from the church. Elias noticed a shift in the sheriff's eyes. Not dismissal, but something worse. Pity. He was already being written off. That afternoon, Elias returned to the chapel. He didn't knock. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, candles had burned down to stubs. The scent of wax and something fouler filled the air, sour, coppery. The crucifix above the altar had fallen from the wall and now lay crooked in the aisle, half buried in dust. Behind the curtain where Father Morren usually prayed, Elias found him curled in a fetal position, muttering. "She smiled at me," the priest whispered. "All those years ago, when I baptized her. She was 3 years old. She smiled like she knew." "Knew what?" "That I wouldn't be strong enough. That none of us are." "Who is she, Morren?" The priest looked up slowly. His eyes were bloodshot. "Not a who." And then the priest told Elias a story. "We've killed her before. Many times. Not just in their town, but elsewhere. Other villages, older towns, places whose names no longer appear on maps. Each time, she appears with a different name. Not always as a murderer. Sometimes as a midwife. Sometimes a tutor. Once as a stage actress. But always the same face. The same calm. And always the same ending. Trial, hanging, burial. And always, the smile, Morren whispered, as if she's seen the whole thing before. He handed Elias a torn page from a prayer book. In the margins was a hand-drawn symbol, a crooked loop like a noose, inside of which was a single unblinking eye. She is not the curse, the priest said. She is the carrier. A mirror. A door. Later that day, Elias returned home to find all the mirrors in his cottage turned to face the wall. He hadn't moved them. Each one, from the small shaving mirror in the wash basin to the glass pane above the hearth, had been turned backwards. Except for one. The large one in his bedroom remained in place. Its surface was clean. Too clean. He stepped toward it, and something within the reflection moved after he did. Not before. Not with. After. He stepped left. The man in the glass hesitated, then mirrored him. When he stepped right, the man stayed still, grinning. It was her face again, superimposed over his own. He blinked. It was gone. 2 days later, the town began to unravel. Mrs. Linder, the baker's wife, vanished while carrying bread to the orphanage. They found the bread, but not her. Just a small pile of black feathers. The schoolchildren refused to enter the classroom. One child, Annabeth, sat in the yard with her head tilted to one side and whispered, "She's teaching today." The blacksmith's forge spat sparks in the shape of human teeth. And over all of it, silence. As if the town had stopped breathing. Elias sought refuge in the old gallows. The structure had been decommissioned after Eliza's second hanging, if that's what it was. But he needed to see it again. It stood there, dry and creaking in the summer wind, with a soft dusting of pine needles collecting beneath the steps. He placed his hand on the lever. "I pulled this before," he whispered. "I can pull it again." And a voice, not his, answered. "But I didn't fall." He spun. No one there. Just the wind and the creak of rope. That night, he returned to the grave beneath the yew. It had changed. The earth was soft, fresh, but no digging marks, no tools, just the impression of something that had risen instead of being buried. And at the center of the grave, lying like a gift, was his own leatherwork apron, the one he'd worn during executions. Folded neatly. On top of it, a single tooth. Human. Still warm. Back home, Elias found his cottage smelled of lavender and burnt rope. Inside, the floorboards were damp. The rug had been removed. In its place, footprints. Small, bare, leading from the doorway to his bed. On the bed was a hand-sewn doll, stuffed with something soft. The stitching at its neck had been undone and restitched with black ribbon. When he picked it up, the doll whispered, "Do it again. Do it right." He burned it in the hearth. It screamed. Elias left town the next morning. He wandered to the old mining tunnels outside Mill Creek, the place where, according to Father Morren's last scribbled notes, the first version of her had been found in 1786. A girl, buried alive, rescued by accident, and never aged. In the dark tunnel, he found carvings. Faces. Hundreds of them. All the same face. The smile. The hollow eyes. Scratched into rock by candlelight and madness. And beneath them, one final carving. A man pulling a lever. And behind him, rows and rows of her. Watching. On his return to town, the bells were ringing. The priest was dead. The mayor missing. The town square abandoned. And the gallows had been rebuilt. Fresh timber. New rope. Elias stood at the edge of it, breath caught in his throat. There, at the top of the steps, stood Eliza Dorne. Not restrained. Not guarded. Just standing. Waiting. She turned to face him and spoke for the first time since the first hanging. "Do it right this time." And she smiled. He stepped up to the platform. "Why?" "You already know why. You were dead." She tilted her head. "I was buried. That's different. You were executed. And you opened the door." He stepped closer until they stood face to face. "Is there any way to close it?" Her smile faltered. Just for a second. And in that second, he saw it. The exhaustion. The torment. The endless repetition. She was a prisoner, too. And the only thing keeping her in the world was him. The hangman. The hinge. When Elias looked down, the lever was in his hand again. But this time, no crowd. No town. Only the trees watching. And Eliza Dorne waiting. The lever must fall. But what comes after? The sky above Elder Glen turned the color of bruised peaches at dusk, an unnatural hue, like something rotting behind a curtain of silk. Elias stood at the edge of the gallows, staring at the wood he had walked 100 times. It hadn't changed. The same knots in the boards. The same weathered nails. The same creak in the third step. But tonight, it was no longer a platform for justice. It was a shrine, a mouth, a thing waiting to feed. He hadn't meant to return here, not truly. But something had drawn him. Not just fear, not just guilt. Something deeper. Like gravity, like memory, like prophecy. Eliza Dorne was waiting. She stood beneath the gallows this time, not above. Her hands folded before her, black dress trailing in the windless evening. Her eyes, still as cruel and calm as the first time he'd seen them, never blinked. "You remember now?" she said. Elias swallowed. "I always remembered." "No," she whispered. "You only remembered the act, not the meaning." He stepped down, toward her. His boots crunched dry grass. "What meaning?" She lifted her chin. Every lever pulled open something. "You thought it was justice. But justice was only the dressing." The priest said. He said half-truths. Because that's all he knew. "Then tell me the whole." Eliza's lips parted into a grin. "It isn't told. It's seen. Step onto the gallows, Elias. Stand where you always stood." He hesitated. "Eliza." "Go." His foot hit the first step. Then the second. The wood moaned beneath him like something waking. By the time he reached the top, he could see the whole field stretched out. The chapel, the tree line, the graveyard in the distance, and the hole where her grave had once been. He looked down. Eliza was gone. In her place stood himself, a younger Elias, clean-shaven, eyes filled with certainty, holding the lever, and above him, himself again, older, head in a noose. He gasped. The world flickered. He was in the workshop, then the chapel, then the prison, each place twisted around the others, collapsing and rising again like a deck of cards being shuffled in the dark. He saw faces he'd forgotten. The man with the cleft lip, the girl who poisoned her sister, the mother who drowned her baby in the river, each of them looking at him, each of them smiling. Elias screamed, but there was no sound, because he wasn't in his body anymore. He was the rope. He was the lever. He was the hinge. He was every choice, every silence, every witness. He saw it now, what the lever did. Not just the killing, not just the ending. It remembered. And memory, when repeated enough, becomes ritual. And ritual, when performed without meaning, becomes a door. He came back to himself beneath the gallows, kneeling, shivering, sobbing. Eliza stood above him, her face, now softer. "You see," she said. "I don't want to," he whispered. "You must." "Why me?" "You were chosen. Because you believed. Because you made it sacred. Only the believer can break the wheel." "What must I do?" She smiled. "Pull it one last time." The gallows groaned. The rope hung empty. The lever waited. Elias stood. Tears ran down his face. He took the lever in both hands. He looked at Eliza. "Will this end it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "No, but it will end you." He nodded. He pulled. The sun rose over Elder Glen. The birds returned. The crows left the bell tower. The ribbon, once tied to trees, drifted away like ash. And beneath the yew tree, a new grave appeared. No marker, just silence. The town never spoke of the hangman again. Not because they feared him, but because none of them remembered, except the children, who sometimes dreamt of a woman in black, standing by the gallows, still smiling, waiting, always waiting.